The morning briefing on the Valdris flagship carried an air of routine confidence that had become standard for first contact missions. Ambassador Thawne reviewed his notes one final time, his 6 eyes scanning the data about this newly discovered species called humans. The report described them as bipedal mammals from a small yellow star system, recently achieving faster-than-light communication but not yet travel. Standard protocol for such encounters had been refined over centuries of successful diplomatic integration. Thawne's aide, a nervous young Valdris named Pell, hovered nearby with additional files. The Galactic Council had designated this mission as low priority, expecting another straightforward addition to their ever-expanding network of civilized worlds. Most species were eager to join once they understood the benefits of galactic citizenship. Advanced technology, interstellar trade, and protection from the various dangers that lurked in deep space. The human solar system appeared unremarkable from a distance. 9 planets orbited their star, with the third hosting the majority of their population. Initial scans showed a world recovering from some kind of industrial expansion, with large cities connected by transportation networks. Their technology seemed roughly equivalent to what most species achieved shortly before making contact with galactic civilization. What struck Thawne as unusual was the human response to their arrival. Instead of panic or overwhelming excitement, the humans had simply acknowledged their presence and invited them to dock at something called Unity 1. The space station itself was impressive enough, clearly built for both research and defense, though its weapon systems appeared primitive by galactic standards. Captain Roy met them at the airlock with a small delegation of humans. Thawne found their appearance surprisingly varied, with different skin tones, facial features, and body sizes, all represented in the group. Most species maintained fairly uniform appearances, but humans seemed to celebrate their physical differences. Roy himself was a middle-aged specimen, with graying hair and calm eyes that missed nothing. The initial negotiations proceeded smoothly. Roy spoke with measured words, asking thoughtful questions about galactic civilization while offering insights into human culture. He presented gifts of human art, music, and literature, explaining that they believed cultural exchange was as important as technological advancement. Thawne found this refreshing after dealing with species that focused solely on acquiring new weapons or industrial techniques. However, small details began accumulating that gave Thawne pause. During a tour of Unity 1, he observed human children in what they called a school. Their educational activities included strategic games that simulated military conflicts, with youngsters as small as 8 years old planning complex battle scenarios. When Thawne expressed surprise, the human teacher explained that such games developed critical thinking and problem-solving skills. The entertainment center proved even more disturbing. Humans consumed stories about individuals facing impossible odds, fighting overwhelming enemies, and refusing to surrender even when facing certain death. Their heroes were often ordinary people who discovered extraordinary strength through suffering and determination. What other species would consider tragic defeats, humans celebrated as inspirational victories. During dinner with the human delegation, Thawne learned more about their recent history. They spoke casually about something called the World Wars, conflicts that had involved their entire planet and resulted in millions of casualties. Yet they discussed these events as learning experiences that had ultimately made their civilization stronger. The casualness with which they mentioned such massive loss of life made Thawne's skin crawl. Roy noticed his discomfort and offered reassurance. He explained that humans had learned from their violent past and were now committed to peaceful expansion into space. They wanted to join galactic civilization as partners, not conquerors. Yet as he spoke, Thawne noticed the weapons mounted throughout the station, far more extensive than any diplomatic facility should require. The human escort ships were another source of concern. What Roy described as standard diplomatic protection carried enough firepower to level a small moon. When Thawne questioned this armament, Roy explained that space was dangerous and they believed in being prepared. He mentioned pirates, hostile aliens, and other threats with the same casual tone, most species reserved for discussing weather patterns. That evening, Thawne attended what humans called a cultural performance. Musicians and storytellers shared their art, creating beautiful melodies and epic tales that moved the audience to tears. Yet even their most peaceful songs contained references to struggle, loss, and the strength found in overcoming hardship. Their lullabies spoke of protecting children from monsters. Their love songs promised loyalty until death. The most unsettling moment came when a young human performer recited something called poetry. She spoke of standing against darkness, of fighting until the last breath, of choosing death over surrender. The audience responded with enthusiasm, clearly inspired by words that would terrify most civilized beings. Thawne realized that humans viewed defiance in the face of impossible odds not as foolishness, but as virtue. During private communications with his ship, Thawne shared his concerns with the mission analysts. They assured him that many species had warrior traditions in their past, usually abandoned once they achieved space travel and encountered more advanced civilizations. Humans would likely follow the same pattern, trading their aggressive tendencies for the comfort and security of galactic membership. Yet something in Roy's eyes suggested otherwise. When the human captain spoke of peace, he did so with the confidence of someone who had seen war and emerged victorious. His diplomatic smile never quite reached those calm, calculating eyes that seemed to constantly evaluate potential threats and advantages. This was not a being who had abandoned violence, but one who had learned to control it. The formal first contact ceremony concluded with both sides expressing satisfaction with the initial meeting. Thawne agreed to escort a human delegation back to the Galactic Council for official integration proceedings. Roy accepted the invitation with gracious enthusiasm, selecting a small team of what he called cultural ambassadors and scientific advisors. As the human shuttle prepared to depart, Unity 1 Thawne observed their farewell rituals. Families embraced with fierce intensity, as if they might never meet again. Colleagues shook hands with solemn promises to make humanity proud. Children watched with wide eyes as their representatives prepared to venture into the unknown galaxy, beyond their system. The sight stirred something unexpected in Thawne's minds. These humans were sending their people into space not as supplicants seeking protection, but as explorers ready to face whatever they might encounter. They showed no fear of the unknown, no hesitation about leaving the safety of their home system. Instead, they demonstrated the quiet confidence of a species that had already survived whatever the universe could throw at them and was ready for more. The grand archives of the Galactic Council had never hosted such an unusual presentation. Dr. Amy stood before the assembled delegates with a simple datapad, her soft voice carrying across the vast chamber as she began humanity's contribution to the Galactic Historical Database. What she described as educational material would fundamentally change how every species in the galaxy viewed her people. The human delegation had offered to share their complete historical records as a gesture of good faith, something most new species did with carefully edited highlights of their achievements. Amy, however, presented raw data with the clinical detachment of a researcher who had spent decades studying her own species. She began with what humans called the Stone Age, when their ancestors first learned to make tools and control fire. Even these early records disturbed the alien delegates. Humans had survived multiple ice ages that would have driven most species to extinction, adapting and thriving in conditions that killed off larger, seemingly stronger creatures. They had developed hunting techniques that involved chasing prey across vast distances for days until the target collapsed from exhaustion. The concept of persistence hunting was unknown to most galactic species, who preferred quick kills or simply gathering plant matter. Council member Rix of the Keltar Dominion interrupted the presentation with a question about human population during these early periods. Amy explained that their ancestors had spread across their entire planet despite having no advanced technology, crossing oceans in small boats and scaling mountain ranges that reached into the clouds. The fact that primitive humans had colonized every continent on their world before discovering electricity amazed species that required centuries of technological development before attempting such expansion. The Bronze Age brought the first detailed accounts of human warfare, and the delegates began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Amy described conflicts between early civilizations with the same neutral tone she had used for climate data, but the scale of violence was unprecedented in galactic history. Entire cities burned to the ground, populations enslaved or scattered, empires rising and falling within single generations. What truly shocked the Council was learning that these conflicts had accelerated human development rather than destroying it. Each war brought new innovations in metallurgy, engineering, and organization. Humans seemed to thrive under pressure that would crush other species, using their struggles as fuel for advancement. Amy showed images of human monuments built during their most violent periods, structures that demonstrated remarkable artistic and technical achievement despite ongoing warfare. The medieval period introduced the concept of organized religion and its role in human conflicts. Species like the i.e. peaceful Valdris could barely comprehend beings who would fight to the death over abstract philosophical differences. Amy explained that humans had launched massive military campaigns across continents to control religious sites, spending centuries in conflicts that claimed millions of lives over ideas rather than resources. Yet even during these dark ages, humans had preserved knowledge, built universities, and created art of stunning beauty. They had developed complex codes of honor that governed warfare, establishing rules about treatment of prisoners and protection of civilians. The delegates realized that even at their most violent, humans maintained ethical systems that many galactic species would consider highly evolved. The Renaissance and Age of Exploration revealed another disturbing aspect of human nature. Amy described how humans had sailed across unknown oceans in wooden ships, risking death from storms, disease, and starvation simply to see what lay beyond the horizon. They had mapped their entire planet through expeditions that killed most participants, yet volunteers never stopped coming forward for each new voyage into the unknown. The Industrial Revolution marked a turning point that made several delegates leave the chamber entirely. Amy described two global conflicts that had involved every major human civilization and resulted in casualties that exceeded the total population of many galactic species. The Great War had claimed over 15 million lives, yet humanity had recovered and grown stronger within a single generation. When Rix demanded specific numbers for their largest conflict, Amy consulted her datapad and replied that their second global war had resulted in approximately 75 million deaths over 6 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Several species had never experienced a single battle with more than a few thousand casualties, yet humans had endured industrialized warfare that consumed entire continents. The most disturbing revelation came when Amy explained that human population had actually increased during and after their most destructive periods. War seemed to strengthen their civilization rather than weaken it, forcing rapid technological advancement and social cooperation. They had invented powered flight, computers, and space travel in the century following their most devastating conflicts. Amy concluded her presentation with humanity's space age, describing their first tentative steps beyond their planet and their hopes for joining galactic civilization. She spoke of humanity's commitment to peace, while displaying images of memorials dedicated to their war dead, monuments that promised never again, while honoring those who had died in conflicts that most species would consider apocalyptic. The question period that followed was subdued. Delegate after delegate asked variations of the same inquiry. How had human civilization survived such constant violence? Amy explained that conflict had been a teacher rather than a destroyer, forcing humans to develop resilience, adaptability, and cooperation that served them well in peaceful endeavors. Elder Quinn of the ancient Nexari asked the question that everyone was thinking. Had humans ever fought a war of complete extinction? Amy paused for the first time during her presentation, considering the question carefully. She explained that while humans had committed terrible acts during warfare, they had always maintained some form of rules of engagement. Even their most ruthless conflicts had ended with defeated enemies being integrated rather than eliminated. The final shock came when Amy mentioned that the historical records she had presented covered only major conflicts and omitted countless smaller wars, revolutions, and civil disputes that had shaped human development. What she had described as their complete history was actually just the highlights of humanity's most significant struggles. As the delegates filed out of the archives, many requested copies of the Human Historical Database for further study. Others immediately began composing reports to their home governments, warning of a species unlike anything previously encountered in galactic civilization. A few simply sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of sharing the galaxy with beings who had turned warfare into an art form while somehow maintaining enough moral development to seek peaceful coexistence. Amy packed her datapad with the same calm efficiency she had shown throughout the presentation. She had fulfilled her mission of sharing human history with galactic civilization, though she suspected the full implications of her people's past would take time to be understood. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their numbers, but their proven ability to survive and thrive in circumstances that would break any other known species. The alarm that shattered the morning quiet on Titan Base 7 was not the gentle chime used for routine drills. Commander Pete rolled out of his bunk with practiced efficiency, his feet hitting the cold floor as emergency lights bathed the small outpost in red urgency. 3 months of peaceful mining operations on Saturn's largest moon had lulled most of his team into thinking they were safe in this remote corner of human space. The communications array crackled with static before clearing, to reveal an image that made Pete's blood freeze. 6 massive ships hung in space above the moon's horizon, their angular hulls bearing the distinctive markings of the Krath Empire. Intelligence reports had described these vessels as fast attack cruisers, designed for quick strikes against lightly defended targets. Someone had decided to test human resolve in the most direct way possible. Pete's garrison numbered exactly 43 souls, including miners, engineers, and support staff. The base's defensive systems consisted of 2 plasma cannons designed more for asteroid clearing than combat, along with a handful of personal weapons meant for emergencies. Against 6 Krath warships, they might as well have been armed with rocks and a harsh language. The mining crew assembled in the main corridor, with the disciplined calm that surprised even Pete. There was no panic, no demands for immediate evacuation. Instead, Chief Engineer Tom was already pulling up schematics on his tablet, pointing out modifications they could make to the excavation equipment. Dr. Lisa, the base's medical officer, was organizing supplies and preparing the infirmary for casualties. Even the newest arrivals were checking equipment and taking inventory of available resources. The Krath commander's face appeared on the main screen with the arrogant sneer typical of his species. He spoke in heavily accented Standard, demanding immediate surrender of the base and all personnel. The humans would be taken as slaves to work Krath mining operations, he explained, since their reputation for endurance had reached even the outer territories. Resistance would result in the complete destruction of the facility. Pete listened to the ultimatum with growing anger that he kept carefully controlled. The Krath had chosen this target because they believed humans were soft, unprepared for real violence after their peaceful integration into galactic society. They expected terror and submission from beings they viewed as primitive mammals playing at civilization. Instead, they were about to receive an education in human nature that would echo across the galaxy. The first Krath landing shuttles touched down on Titan's frozen surface exactly 2 hours after the ultimatum expired. Pete watched through the external cameras as armored figures disembarked, moving with the confident swagger of predators who had never encountered serious resistance. Their weapons were advanced plasma rifles capable of cutting through standard defensive barriers, while their armor could withstand most conventional attacks. What they encountered instead was a mining facility, transformed into a fortress by people who understood that preparation and ingenuity could overcome superior firepower. Tom had converted the ore processing equipment into improvised artillery, using magnetic accelerators to launch chunks of metal at hypersonic speeds. The maintenance tunnels had become a network of fighting positions connected by passages too narrow for armored Krath to navigate easily. The first wave of attackers advanced on the main entrance, expecting minimal resistance. Instead, they walked into a carefully prepared killing field where every angle had been calculated and every approach covered by crossfire. The humans had turned their workplace into a weapon, using industrial tools and mining charges to create defensive positions that would make professional soldiers proud. Pete coordinated the defense from the central command post, his voice calm, over the communication system as he directed his improvised army of miners and technicians. They fought with the methodical precision of people who understood that their survival depended on making every shot count and every second of preparation matter. There was no room for heroics or grandstanding, only the grim mathematics of small. Unit tactics executed by ordinary people pushed beyond their limits. The battle lasted 18 hours, far longer than the Krath had anticipated for what should have been a simple raid. Human defenders fell back through prepared positions, extracting maximum casualties from each engagement before retreating to the next defensive line. They used their knowledge of the facility's layout to turn every corridor into a potential ambush site, every junction into a defensive strongpoint. When the relief force arrived, the surviving Krath found themselves caught between the base's remaining defenders and Admiral Beth's response fleet. The human reinforcements moved with mechanical precision that spoke of countless hours of training and coordination. Their ships worked together like components of a single organism, executing maneuvers that required absolute trust between crews and split-second timing. The human vessels targeted specific systems on the Krath ships rather than attempting to destroy them outright. Weapons arrays were disabled with surgical precision, propulsion systems were crippled with carefully placed shots, and life support was left intact while command and control capabilities were systematically eliminated. It was warfare conducted with the efficiency of an industrial process and the restraint of a species that understood the difference between victory and slaughter. Admiral Beth's first action after securing the area was to dispatch medical teams, to treat wounded Krath soldiers with the same priority given to human casualties. The sight of human medics working to save the lives of beings who had come to enslave them created a profound impact on the surviving attackers. They had expected demons and found healers, warriors who fought with deadly efficiency yet showed mercy to defeated enemies. The Krath survivors were repatriated to their empire with their ships repaired and supplies for the journey home. Admiral Beth personally met with their senior officer to explain that humans held no grudge against the Krath people, only against those who chose to prey upon the innocent. The attack on Titan Base 7 was considered a misunderstanding that need not be repeated, provided the lesson was properly understood. The reports that reached Krath High Command described humans as a species unlike anything in their experience. They fought with the calm determination of professionals while maintaining moral standards that many galactic civilizations would consider idealistic. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to view the entire conflict as a regrettable necessity rather than an opportunity for conquest or revenge. Word of the Titan incident spread through the underground networks that connected pirates, raiders, and other predatory species throughout the galaxy. The message was simple and clear. Humans were not the easy targets they appeared to be. Behind their diplomatic smiles and peaceful intentions lay a capacity for violence that was both precisely controlled and absolutely ruthless when circumstances demanded it. Commander Pete received a commendation for his defense of the base, though he insisted that the real heroes were the miners and technicians who had transformed themselves into soldiers when duty called. The memorial erected at Titan Base 7 honored both human and Krath dead, a monument to the tragic necessity of violence in defense of the innocent and the hope that understanding might prevent future conflicts. The intelligence briefing room deep within the Galactic Council complex had never felt smaller. Agent Nex spread holographic displays across every available surface, creating a three-dimensional map of human influence that grew more disturbing with each new data point. What had started as routine monitoring of a new species had evolved into an investigation of the most successful expansion in galactic history. Nex had spent months following paper trails, trade agreements, and diplomatic communications that painted a picture no one in Council leadership wanted to accept. In less than 2 years since first contact, humans had established formal relationships with over 200 species across 47 star systems. More alarming still, these weren't simple trade partnerships, but complex mutual defense agreements that created an interconnected web of human-allied worlds. The pattern was unlike anything in galactic history. Most new species spent decades building trust with a handful of neighbors before attempting broader diplomatic initiatives. Humans had somehow convinced bitter enemies to not only work with them, but to extend protection to each other through human mediation. Species that had fought border wars for centuries were now sharing technology and resources under human guidance. The Vorthon Republic and the Helix Collective provided the most striking example. These two civilizations had maintained a state of Cold War for over 3,000 years, their territorial disputes creating a buffer zone of dead worlds between their borders. Within 6 months of human contact, both sides had signed a comprehensive peace treaty that established joint colonies in their former no-man's land. How had humans accomplished what centuries of council mediation had failed to achieve? Nex studied the diplomatic records and found the answer in humanity's unique approach to conflict resolution. Instead of focusing on compromise and mutual concessions, human negotiators had identified common threats that required cooperation to address. They had turned former enemies into allies by giving them shared purposes that transcended old grievances. The humans' understanding of warfare proved to be their greatest diplomatic asset. They could analyze military situations with clinical precision, identifying weaknesses and strengths that both sides might miss. More importantly, they could demonstrate exactly how continued conflict would weaken both parties against external threats that neither could face alone. Ambassador Thon's reports from the human home system revealed another disturbing trend. Earth's population was not just growing, but actively preparing for expansion beyond their solar system. Human children were being educated in multiple alien languages, their schools teaching xenobiology and interstellar law alongside traditional subjects. This was not a species stumbling into galactic civilization, but one methodically preparing to claim its place among the stars. The economic implications were staggering. Human trade ships were appearing in markets across the galaxy, offering goods and services that undercut established monopolies while maintaining higher quality standards. Their manufacturing techniques were surprisingly advanced, combining efficiency with environmental responsibility in ways that impressed even the most sophisticated galactic civilizations. More concerning was their approach to military technology. Humans were not purchasing advanced weapon systems from galactic suppliers, but instead offering their own designs for sale. Species that had considered human technology primitive were discovering that human weapons were both more reliable and more devastating than anything in their current arsenals. The cultural exchange program revealed the most insidious aspect of human expansion. Human art, music, and literature were spreading throughout galactic civilization like a benevolent plague, changing how other species viewed concepts of heroism, sacrifice, and individual responsibility. Alien youth were consuming human entertainment. that celebrated ordinary beings overcoming impossible odds through determination and teamwork. Nex had received reports from over 50 worlds describing the same phenomenon. Young aliens were abandoning traditional careers to pursue what they called human-style exploration and adventure. Ancient species that had maintained stable, conservative societies for millennia were experiencing waves of innovation and risk-taking. Inspired by human cultural examples, the psychological impact was unprecedented. Humans had introduced concepts that fundamentally challenged how most species viewed their place in the universe. The idea that any individual could rise above their circumstances through effort and courage was revolutionary to civilizations, built on rigid social hierarchies and predetermined roles. Even more disturbing were the reports from the galactic frontier. Exploration teams were finding evidence of human presence in sectors that official records showed as unexplored. These weren't formal colonies, but small outposts and research stations established by what humans called independent operators who pushed beyond the boundaries of known space. When questioned about these unauthorized expansions, human authorities explained that their people had an inherent drive to explore and that preventing such expeditions would violate fundamental human rights. They took responsibility for their citizens' actions while making clear that the impulse to push into unknown territory was an integral part of human nature. The military analysis was the most sobering section of Nex's report. Human defensive capabilities far exceeded what their diplomatic representatives had revealed during first contact. Every human colony, research station, and trade outpost was fortified to a degree that would be considered paranoid by galactic standards. They built their civilian infrastructure with the assumption that conflict was inevitable and preparation was essential. Human military doctrine emphasized rapid response and overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. Their ships carried enough firepower to sterilize planets, yet were equipped with medical facilities capable of treating casualties from multiple species. They prepared for total war while maintaining the capacity for humanitarian intervention. The most chilling discovery came from analyzing human educational materials. Their children learned history through examples of their ancestors facing extinction-level threats and emerging victorious through sacrifice and innovation. Human culture was built around the assumption that survival required constant vigilance and the willingness to pay any price necessary to protect their people. Yet these same beings who prepared for the worst were also the galaxy's most generous philanthropists. Human aid organizations were providing disaster relief, medical assistance, and educational support to dozens of worlds without any apparent expectation of return. They seemed genuinely committed to improving life for all galactic citizens while simultaneously building the most formidable military machine in known space. The final section of Nex's report addressed the question that kept Council leadership awake at night. What did humans ultimately want? The evidence suggested they were not seeking domination in any traditional sense. Instead, they appeared to be building a galaxy-spanning network of allies bound together by mutual benefit and shared values. Human expansion was not conquest, but conversion, turning other species into willing partners who adopted human approaches to problem-solving and conflict resolution. They were creating an empire of the willing, held together not by force, but by the demonstrated effectiveness of human methods and the genuine improvement in quality of life that followed human involvement. The briefing concluded with Nex's recommendation that the Council face reality. Humanity was already the dominant force in galactic civilization, whether officially recognized or not. The only question remaining was whether the Council would adapt to this new reality or find itself bypassed by events beyond its control. The emergency session of the full Galactic Assembly had been called with unprecedented urgency. Representatives from over 800 species filled the massive chamber, their varied forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that normally symbolized the diversity and cooperation of galactic civilization. Today, however, the atmosphere was tense with uncertainty and barely controlled fear as they faced a decision that would reshape their understanding of the universe. Elder Quinn of the ancient Nexari rose slowly from his position at the center of the assembly. At over 2,000 years old, he had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of galactic powers, but nothing in his vast experience had prepared him for the phenomenon called humanity. His words carried the weight of ages as he addressed the gathering with the gravity the situation demanded. The evidence was undeniable. Every species that had chosen to challenge humanity had either been defeated in decisive conflicts or converted into willing allies through demonstrations of human capability combined with unexpected mercy. The Krath Empire's failed raid on Titan Base 7 had become the template for a dozen similar encounters, each ending with human victory and the strange aftermath of humans helping their former enemies rebuild and recover. More disturbing still was the pattern of species that had initially opposed human expansion only to become their most enthusiastic supporters within months of first contact. The psychological impact of encountering beings who could destroy their enemies, yet chose instead to heal and educate them, was proving irresistible to civilizations that had never witnessed such restrained power. The hegemony of steel had been the latest test case. This machine intelligence collective had considered organic life forms to be inefficient parasites worthy only of exploitation or elimination. Their first encounter with human space had resulted in the complete destruction of a human research station and the apparent deaths of all 300 personnel aboard. The human response had shattered every prediction about organic behavior patterns. Instead of seeking revenge or demanding compensation, the human fleet had arrived with construction materials and engineering expertise. They had rebuilt the research station as a memorial to their dead, then offered to share their findings with the hegemony if it would prevent future misunderstandings. The machine intelligences had been forced to recalculate their assessment of organic life when faced with beings who responded to aggression with forgiveness and to destruction with creation. Within weeks, the hegemony had signed a formal alliance with humanity, their collective consciousness genuinely impressed by a species that could transcend what they had considered inevitable organic limitations. Captain Roy stepped forward to address the assembly, his presence commanding attention despite his unremarkable appearance. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the worst the universe could offer and emerged with his principles intact. His uniform bore no excessive decorations, only the simple insignia of someone who served rather than ruled. Roy's speech began with an acknowledgement of galactic fears about human expansion and capabilities. He understood why other species found humanity disturbing, why their combination of military prowess and moral restraint seemed too dangerous to tolerate. The galaxy had learned to fear them because humans represented something new in the cosmic order, a force that could not be easily categorized or controlled. But Roy revealed the truth that changed everything. Humanity had not been expanding into an empty galaxy, but into one already threatened by dangers that most civilizations had never encountered. While the Council maintained peaceful trade routes and diplomatic protocols, humans had been quietly fighting wars against threats that would have destroyed galactic civilization if left unchecked. The Void Stalkers had been contained and eliminated. By human forces operating in the galactic rim, their reality-warping abilities neutralized by humans who somehow maintained their sanity while confronting cosmic horrors that drove other species insane. Ancient machine minds that had slumbered since the galaxy's youth had been awakened by expanding civilization, only to find humans waiting with weapons and strategies specifically designed to counter their alien geometries of destruction. The plague of silence that had consumed entire sectors in the outer spiral had been stopped by human medical researchers who sacrificed their lives to develop countermeasures against a disease that attacked the concept of communication itself. Civilizations that had never heard of these threats had been saved by humans who asked for nothing in return, except the knowledge that innocent lives had been preserved. Roy displayed images of human memorials scattered across the galaxy, monuments, to the thousands who had died fighting nightmares that official records would never acknowledge. These were not conquerors seeking glory, but guardians who chose to stand between civilization and the darkness that surrounded it, accepting death as the price of others' safety. The revelation continued with evidence of ongoing threats that human forces were currently engaging. Dark matter entities that fed on stellar energy, causing stars to age and die prematurely. Dimensional parasites that infected space-time itself, creating areas where physics became unreliable and navigation impossible. Living ideas that spread through communication networks, corrupting entire civilizations by rewriting their fundamental concepts of reality. Humanity had taken responsibility for containing these threats not through any formal agreement, but because they were the only species with the combination of military capability, mental resilience, and moral commitment necessary for such work. They had become the galaxy's immune system, fighting infections that most civilizations could not even perceive. The assembly listened in stunned silence as Roy explained that human expansion had never been about conquest, but about establishing the infrastructure necessary to defend galactic civilization from threats it did not know existed. Every human colony, every trade route, every diplomatic alliance was part of a vast defensive network designed to detect and respond to cosmic-level dangers. The children's games that had disturbed Ambassador Thon were revealed to be training. Exercises for scenarios that human leaders hoped would never occur but knew were inevitable. The entertainment that celebrated individuals overcoming impossible odds was psychological preparation for a species that had accepted the burden of standing against forces that should have been impossible to defeat. Human culture's emphasis on heroism and sacrifice was not primitive glorification of violence, but sophisticated conditioning for a people who had seen too much of what lurked in the spaces between stars. They told stories of ordinary people becoming heroes because they understood that when cosmic threats emerged, ordinary people were often all that stood between existence and oblivion. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. The Galactic Council granted humanity not membership but recognition as the protectorate of galactic civilization, acknowledging what had already become reality through human actions rather than political maneuvering. They would coordinate with human forces in matters of galactic security while maintaining their traditional role in trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. The ceremony concluded with human ships taking positions around Council worlds, their crews ready to defend civilizations that had only recently learned to fear and respect them. The galaxy's nightmares now had names to whisper in terror: Admiral Beth, Commander Pete, Captain Roy, and thousands of others who had chosen to stand guard against the dark. In the vast emptiness between galaxies, ancient evils that had fed on. The suffering of countless civilizations felt the change like a cold wind. The galaxy had found its guardians at last, and those guardians were human. The age of easy prey was ending, replaced by something the cosmic predators had never encountered. A species that hunted the hunters and protected the innocent not for glory or profit, but because it was the right thing to do. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, as if the universe had exhaled in relief after holding its breath for eons. Humanity had taken its place as the galaxy's watchman, and for the first time in cosmic history, the civilizations that looked up at the night sky could do so without fear of what might be looking back.